You were once carried through a doorway you will never remember walking through. Someone sang to you. Someone fed you at 3 in the morning. Someone watched you take your first step and cried a little, maybe. You have no memory of any of it. Not because it didn't matter, not because your brain was broken. Something else was happening in there, something far stranger than simple forgetting. Why does the first 2 or 3 years of your life disappear so completely when you can still remember in exact detail the color of a shirt you wore to a birthday party at age 7? Let's start with the size of the gap. Most adults cannot recall specific events from before roughly age 3.5. Some people report nothing at all before age 5 or 6. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it infantile amnesia. Sigmund Freud coined the term over a century ago. He assumed the memories were there, buried, repressed, because they were too disturbing to access. It was a good story. It was also wrong. Here's the strange part. Babies remember things, not vaguely, specifically. In the 1980s, a researcher named Carolyn Rovey Collier ran an experiment with infants as young as 3 months old. She tied a ribbon from a baby's ankle to a mobile hanging above the crib. Kick your leg, the mobile moves. Babies figured this out fast. They kicked with obvious delight, watching the mobile spin every time. Weeks later, with no reminder, Rovey Collier brought the same babies back and hung the same mobile. They started kicking immediately. Their tiny bodies remembered a connection formed weeks earlier, so the memory was there. It didn't vanish overnight. It survived, at least for a while, inside a nervous system that was 3 months old, which means something else must be going wrong. Not storage, something closer to translation. Think about your brain like a library that hasn't built its card catalog yet. The books are on the shelves, nobody has labeled the aisles, nobody has written down where anything is. That's closer to what neuroscientists now believe is happening. The hippocampus, the part of your brain responsible for forming and organizing long-term memories, is still under construction in early childhood. It's not absent, it's active, it's just immature, still growing new neurons at a startling rate, still wiring the connections that let a memory get filed away in a form you can retrieve years later. A psychologist named Patricia Bauer has spent decades studying exactly this window. Her research shows that toddlers can form memories that last for months, sometimes longer. But those early memories are fragile. They compete against an avalanche of new neurons being added to the hippocampus almost daily. Here's where it gets counterintuitive. That flood of new neurons, the very thing that makes early childhood such an extraordinary period for learning language, faces, movement, all of it, may also be the thing erasing your earliest memories. Researchers call this neurogenesis. New neurons integrating into existing brain circuits, quite literally rewriting the wiring. Some studies in animals suggest that a high rate of new neuron growth can disrupt previously stored memories, almost like renovating a house while people are still living in it. Walls get torn down, old furniture gets buried under construction dust. Your brain during those first years is under near constant renovation. And the memories from that period, no matter how vivid they felt in the moment, often don't survive the construction. But there's a second piece of the puzzle, and it has nothing to do with neurons. It has to do with language. A memory researcher named Nora Newcomb has pointed out that most of what adults remember from childhood is organized around a narrative, a story with a beginning, characters, a setting, cause and effect. You needed language to build that kind of structure. And before roughly age 2, you didn't have much of it. Even after you learn to talk, there's a delay. Studies have shown that a child's ability to verbally describe an event lags behind their ability to actually remember it happening. So even if a 2-year-old has the memory sitting somewhere in their brain, they may not yet have the linguistic tools to encode it into a story they can carry forward and later put into words. Memory, it turns out, isn't just recording. It's translation into a format your future self can retrieve. And for the first years of life, you didn't have a working translator yet. Put those two things together. A hippocampus still under construction, flooded with new neurons that disrupt fragile early memories. and a mind without the language scaffolding to turn experience into a retrievable story. That's why the memories don't disappear all at once either. Infantile amnesia doesn't work like a wall coming down on a single date. It fades gradually. Ask a 4-year-old about something that happened to them at age 2, and they can often describe it in surprising detail. Ask that same child again 2 years later, and the memory has usually thinned out or vanished completely. The window for retrieving early memories is closing the whole time, even while new ones are still being formed on top of it. So somewhere between the ages of 2 and 7, an entire era of your life is quietly dissolving. Not because you weren't paying attention, not because nothing important happened, because the machinery for keeping permanent memories hadn't finished being built yet. There's something almost generous about that, if you think about it differently. Your brain wasn't failing you, it was prioritizing. Those years weren't wasted on forgettable material, they were spent building the very foundation memory depends on. Learning to walk, learning that objects still exist when they're out of sight, learning that the people who leave the room come back, learning a language complex enough to eventually hold a story about yourself. You weren't collecting memories yet. You were building the shelf they'd eventually sit on. And once that shelf is finished, sometime around age 6 or 7, memory starts to behave the way it does for the rest of your life. Events start sticking around, stories start holding together. The narrator that lives inside your head, the one constantly turning your days into something coherent, finally comes fully online. Which brings us back to that doorway. The one you were carried through as a baby, the one you'll never consciously remember. Somewhere in your body, in the shape of your walk, in the way certain smells or sounds still trigger a feeling you can't quite name, that early period never actually left you. It just left without a story attached. It shaped you before you had the language to describe how. Every time you can't remember your own 3rd birthday or the sound of a lullaby someone definitely sang to you, you're not looking at a gap in your life. You're looking at the invisible scaffolding your entire memory was built on top of. You were there for all of it. You just weren't finished becoming the person who could remember it yet.